I think with a covert narcissist, because they are wolves in sheep's clothing, they make you vulnerable. You trust them. And when you trust someone so implicitly because they are kind to you, they seem caring, they show up as like a knight in shining armor. And then when they turn around and they show you their true colors and they abuse you, or they're incredibly cruel and harmful, and you find out, oh my gosh, this person lacks empathy entirely, that is such a hard revelation.
Victims often don't know they're in a dangerous situation until they find themselves in the thick of it. Today, Elena Sagredos, who is a domestic violence advocate and the author of the book But They're So Nice, joins me to talk about the insidious nature of covert aggression and a covert abuse. If you'd like to follow her, be sure to check out her content on Instagram and TikTok. I'll make sure to put the link to her handle in the show notes. I am so excited that you're here joining me today on this podcast, and I'm particularly interested in talking about covert abuse and covert narcissism. I've seen your content on TikTok, and I just love the way that you educate us about covert abuse, even the power and a control wheel. You go into that at great depth, which is helpful because I don't think most people I know, can you believe this as a psychologist? I'm not hyper aware of the power and control wheel either. So explain for people who have never heard of covert abuse before. What is it exactly?
Yeah, that is such a big question. I would say, just to sum it up, covert abuse is any abuse that isn't obvious. It's not in your face. It's not overt abuse. They're not yelling at you or hitting you, but it involves a lot of manipulation and gaslighting and passive aggressive remarks that kind of chip away at you over time. So it's kind of like that death by 1,000 paper cuts, the slow drip of poison, which is, I think, why a lot of people that are in these relationships might not even realize they're being abused until years down the line.
Yeah. Now, are you coming at this from your own personal experience, or is it something you just have seen a lot? I mean, how did you kind of step into this arena in the first place?
Wow. Yeah, it's my own personal experience. I was also part of a family with a very abusive father. And then I found and he was more of like an overt abuser. So I'm like, okay, I've seen an abuser. I know how they act. I know how they behave. I could clock them. And then my own personal experience, I saw a covert abuser and I experienced a covert abuser. And that was something I wasn't familiar with at all. And leaving the relationship, I was so confused. I didn't understand what I had experienced or the words or the language to use to describe it. I just knew that it wasn't normal, right? So did a lot of research. I later became a violence advocate, took some classes there, really learned about what is abuse, what is power and control, and how it could look and manifest outside of those overt acts of aggression.
Isn't it amazing how those experiences can be so pivotal that we walk out and think, I have to understand that. I don't know if you read my story, Love You More, but when I exited that relationship, I felt shattered, partly because it's a shattering experience, but also because as a psychologist, I thought I should have known better. And then to have been so sort of demolished psychologically, been duped, really, that's, outright duped by someone who had a second, living a double life. So I hear you kind of went through sort of something similar, that you went on a journey to figure out what actually happened here.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have that too. It's like, there's like a quote, like a social media quote that's like, I went looking for love and I left the relationship with a Ph.D. in narcissism. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. You leave. The way I think the mind first starts healing is trying to wrap your mind around like what you just went through so that you understand it and process it. And so a lot of people go into that education phase. And I think I went into that education phase times 10. And I read all the books and I really dove into it and really tried to understand it. And it was that moment where I was like, okay, so I think he had all the characteristics of a narcissist, but it wasn't like the grandiose boasting type of narcissist. It was the reserved, cold, a little calculative, maybe a little closer to psychopathy, but I think a lot of covert narcissists are a little bit like that, where they're cold and calculative, but they're not, they talk down to you, but it's hard to pinpoint. So you don't exactly, when you read the literature about narcissism and abuse, your experience doesn't align with those manifestations. So you're trying
Yeah.
to understand what it is. And I know a lot of people then read books and, like Healing from Hidden Abuse. Like those are big books for covert abuse. All the pieces
Right.
start adding up and then you become an expert.
Yeah, certainly by life, that's for sure. And I love the title of your book, which is But He's So Nice. I mean,
Mm,
I don't know if you said but he's so nice or but they're so nice, but
but they're so
that's
nice.
what I don't I don't know if you how much you know of my story, but my narcissistic ex, and I believe he's a narcissistic sociopath, honestly, because
Yeah.
it was a I don't the sum of the story is it was a marriage con. The whole
Yeah,
thing was a
it's
con.
the gosh, you're right, but they have that behavior where they feed off of other people. They like
Yeah.
con people. So that's very
Exactly.
sociopath.
It's very very parasitic, very very
Parasitic,
vampirish
yes.
actually. Yeah, exactly. And throughout that whole thing, he never raised his voice at me, never called me one name the entire time.
Mhm.
Was always appeared so gentlemanly and in control. And in fact, that's what he used withdrawal and rejection and stonewalling as a way to punish me. He withdrew love. That the
Yeah.
punishment was to disappear and withdraw love. And I
Yeah.
think that you're right. We get done and we think, is that a really abuse? Because it looks so polite. I mean, there was so much civility in the relationship. Yeah, there were hot moments where he might have thrown a phone at a wall, but those were really rare and far in between. And so it creates this confusion about, and the other thing he did that threw me off so much was he kept claiming he was working so hard that he had never done so much. And he was in therapy, supposedly. Today, I'm not for sure I believe he was really going to therapy. So you see all this work and you think, well, this person's invested and I've never seen somebody work so hard, especially when you come out of a family where that wasn't the priority, getting help. So you're confused. Then you think, okay, maybe I'm expecting too much or wanting too much. And it wasn't only until and I know this is something you talk a lot about, coercive control. It wasn't until it was all said and done that I realized that our schedule was coercive control, that I was experiencing tremendous ambient abuse. So describe that for people who've maybe they've never heard of ambient abuse or coercive control. How can we recognize that we're in a coercively controlling situation?
Yeah. So I am a big advocate for listening to your body and how it feels because I think before your mind has caught up, your body feels that there's something wrong.
Hmm.
If you feel afraid of doing X because of your partner, I think that's a big indication that you're being controlled, right? I'm afraid of, I come back and I have more groceries than normal. Will I be judged when I get home and interrogated about the amount of money that I just spent? Is this a repeating pattern? Because abuse is a pattern, right? So I think
Hmm.
that is a huge indication. Like, are you afraid of doing something that should be normal? Like this is your freedom is impacted. That's a huge piece of coercive control. It's a person that's controlling and coercing your environment, your life, the way that you move and behave. That's the first thing. Absolutely. Is like,
I,
how do you feel around
I
your partner?
But I can already hear people pushing back and saying, yeah, but isn't that part of a relationship because you're impacting each other? In fact, I did one on financial abuse, which I think you
I saw
actually
that.
weighed in and said, oh, yeah, that's financial abuse. But the amount of comments like, no, that's fiscal responsibility because
Mm,
that person's behavior is impacting how the two of them are budgeting. She wasn't staying or he wasn't staying within the budget. But because here's the thing that I noticed when we get used to relationships where we live in fear and we're trying to manage that other person's emotional response, we start to think that that's just what relationships are like, is that we're doing this dance of trying to avoid conflict. So how did you recognize that that's actually, there's something wrong with that it really shouldn't be like that?
yeah, I think that plus the talking down to. Like if this person is
Mm,
also making you feel small and less than, because there's ways of approaching financial issues in a relationship. That doesn't mean that you're condescending and talking down to your partner. A partnership is that. It's a partnership. You guys are both on equal grounds and you speak to each other as equals because you're a partner through life, right? If
right.
you notice that your partner is acting more like a parent, that is a controlling relationship.
Yes, yes. Or mentors, a mentor,
Oh,
like they're
yeah, they
always
teach
teaching you,
you.
you know?
Yes.
Exactly. Because in fact, here's one of my phrases that I hate. That triggers me when somebody does that. Oh, I'm really proud of you. I'm thinking, what? So you share something that you did great and you say, I'm so proud of you. You're so proud of me?
Oh,
You see what I'm saying? You've evaluated me. Or
yeah.
good job. They'll say, good job. Good job? You're not my boss.
Mm,
I'm not performing for you.
mhm,
This is a collegial or a friendship. Do you see? Isn't it amazing? I guess that's where I was driving with this, is that I think, unfortunately, our culture it's so pervasive, this kind of thinking, that it's throughout everywhere. We don't know the degree that it's a little coercive. It's a
mhm,
little patronizing and insulting.
mhm. It is, yeah. I think we've normalized it too. Yeah, and that's
I
the
do.
problem. I think that's such a big issue because then you get into these relationships, and because you've normalized it and society has normalized it, you think it's normal, and then it
Yeah.
escalates.
Yeah, exactly. Now, when you look back to that relationship, do you end up having insight into thinking, oh, I missed this, or I wish I'd seen that, or I really wish I'd understood what that meant? Do you have some kind of
Mhm.
feelings about your awareness now? Because I have a feeling that you would probably see it very differently if you were to do it over again.
Yeah, there's so many times, especially in early stages of healing and learning, where I feel like I went around my apartment sounding like a crazy person because I was like,
Mhm.
"Oh, that was a lie. Oh, that was abuse. Oh," so you're having these aha
Mm.
moments, um, sometimes out loud, and you're like putting the pieces together. And so many times I'd be like, I wish I said that. I wish I stood up for
Mm.
myself. I wish I did that. But you have to be like really like gentle on yourself because you didn't see it at the time. You were operating in the knowledge and the understanding that you had at the time, right? So it's so normal to beat yourself up. But at the end of the day, like that happened. You handled it the only way you could. And now you're learning from it.
Yeah, is that how you've made peace with the shame that you felt? Because I know I walked away feeling not only psychologically insecure. I mean, it was a
Mhm.
pretty devastating experience. And then the more I learned, because like you said, you're right, it is a process of uncovering. I remember somebody way early on, I found out he was serial cheating 2 months into the marriage. So I got married,
Wow.
was on the honeymoon, and found out the last night of the honeymoon, I got a letter from the other woman. And we immediately went into intensive treatment for, I thought it was sex addictions. I thought
Yeah.
what we were doing. And interestingly enough, I knew he was a narcissist. And we just don't teach, at least when I was in school, we didn't teach you that there's all this ramifications that come with narcissistic relationships. So I didn't know it was going to be
Yeah.
damaging to me. I just thought he'd be a difficult person at times. That's all I thought was going to be wrong.
Yeah.
So I'm in this intensive, and this person says to me, the therapist says to me, this is only the tip of the iceberg. You've only know just a little bit. So sure enough, it continues like it's the gift that doesn't stop giving. After I'm out of the relationship and trying to heal, I'm making more discoveries. I'm making massive conclusions, and I'm really like being blown away. And I'm feeling shattered by that. So for me, it was kind of this double layer of one, feeling like, how could I, as a psychologist, not have seen this and known, and how stupid I feel. But it's just that you're looking back and you make these discoveries, and the discoveries are so devastating as the betrayal of it.
Yeah.
But it's also that you feel like an idiot. You didn't see it at the time.
Yeah. Um, my God, yeah. The two pieces. One was that, even a psychologist, sometimes I use you as an example, but you're not the only person I know that has like a therapy background that have been in abusive
Hmm.
relationships. I think it's unfortunately common because you have a higher level of empathy. You care about people, and that's probably why you got into this profession. Um, And so they thrive they find people with higher empathy that are excusing behavior and rationalizing behavior and are intelligent. And so they use that against you, right? Because you'll rationalize away the behavior. And also that I think we as a society, just in general, even with we underestimate when people say is a narcissist, we don't say how dangerous that is. We think, oh,
Yeah,
a narcissistic relationship, oh, a narcissist, they're fine. It's not that bad. They're just a little difficult. These are
right,
people that are so incredibly disordered that they ruined the lives of people around them and they exploit people and they ruin their own lives at the end of the day, usually,
right.
but they also ruin the lives of they walk around, ruin the lives of everyone around them. And they put people in danger, like physical danger in a lot of cases, emotional danger, emotional unsafety. So it's so, I hate when I see people like undermine it. Oh, they're just like a narcissist. I'm like, oh my gosh, no, that's like such a
Yeah.
horrible, horrible pathology. And then the other thing was like, did I feel shame? I think for me, initially, I felt duped. I felt like I was tricked. Like you get out of you wonder like, oh my God, the whole relationship was fake. I felt like everything was fake. Like, was any of it real? Like that is, I think, a big thing that we get into feeling after a narcissistic relationship, because like the big defining factor is that person comes in with a persona, a mask, and you fall in love with that persona. So after the mask slips and you're putting together the pieces of information and the abuse and really understanding what you went through, you're going to feel a huge sense of grief, but also like you were tricked. So I felt less shame and more like, oh my God, I was duped. I was tricked. And I felt fear, actually, because I didn't know people like this existed and that they were so convincing. You know, I thought, like I said, I had experience with an overt abuser in my life. So I thought I could point out the big angry guy. No problem. You know, I could point him out in a bar and I could avoid him. And he's, you know, yelling at the waiter. No problem. What I felt was fear. Like, oh my God, people like this exist. They are walking among us and they're so incredibly convincing.
Yeah. Which is like why I love your title, But He's So Nice. And I also really appreciate Dr. Simon's book called In Sheep's Clothing, because that's what it feels like. It's like they're masquerading, covert narcissists particularly masquerade as the rest of us. And when we meet them, we don't know that we've met somebody really toxic because they play the victim so well. And the victim, that role of victimization or the victim mentality is a sympathy card. And we mistaken sympathy for empathy.
Yes.
We end up thinking, oh, look, they feel sorry about stuff. Oh, look, they're upset about stuff. That means this person has sensitivity. No, it doesn't. It just may be another form of them centering themselves, but instead of centering of look how great I am, it's look at how bad I am or how helpless I am. It's the poor me instead of the big me. And we don't, we miss that. And I think, in fact, I was going to ask you why you thought people think this personality is so dangerous, because when I assess danger, I'm thinking of lethality. But I have a feeling we're talking about something else. We're not talking about, oh, are they going to just, literally go out and kill me? But so what do you think? When you hear people say this is the most dangerous group of people, why do you think they think that?
I think it almost comes down to like going back to the bear versus man analogy, but it's like the bear I can tell is a bear. The overt abuser, to a point, can kind of clock them. I think with a covert narcissist, because they are wolves in sheep's clothing, they open you up to, they make you vulnerable. You trust them. And when you trust someone so implicitly because they are kind to you, they seem caring, they show up as like a knight in shining armor, and you're like, oh my gosh, I met my person. They're like so great. How did I get so lucky? And then when they turn around and they show you their true colors and they abuse you, or they're incredibly cruel and harmful, and you find out, oh my gosh, this person lacks empathy entirely and they're callous, that is such a hard revelation, because what you experience then after is betrayal trauma. And healing from betrayal trauma is so difficult for so many people. So I think it's that the psychological warfare that you're trying to handle in the relationship and not even realize what's happening, and they break you down slowly, and you just wake up one day and your self-esteem is just not what it was in the beginning of the relationship, and you're a shell of yourself. And then afterwards, when the fog finally clears, you have to heal. You have to heal from that betrayal trauma.
So, okay, you asked yourself the question, did he ever love me? And I know this is, by the way, you and I are using gendered pronouns because it happened to us with a man, but I'm not saying that it's limited to me. I think, in fact, and I'd like to know, so this is the second question, but I still want to follow up with my first question. I think there are more women who are covert narcissists than there are men, is my suspicion. Because I think they fly under we could even talk about why that is. I have a theory. I don't know this in research, but I have a theory about why. But the question I wanted to originally ask you is, do you now, looking back, do you think he loved you or do you think he didn't?
I think he loved in the only capacity he knew how, but it's not true love, right?
Yeah.
Like, true love is selfless, it's kind, it's, there's so many, like that is love.
Yeah.
Someone that loves you doesn't treat you that way.
Right.
So I don't think that they love in the way that we love.
Yeah.
I
that's my answer too. I think there's a huge group of people, and I'm not saying they're all narcissists, but they had some narcissistic traits. And they love somebody to the degree that that person benefits them. But
Mhm.
if they were to give that person up for the good of that person, sacrificially, like say, I realize I'm willing to let my love go with you because you're better, because your opportunities you're going to do so much better without me. I think a lot of people can't do that. And this
Yeah.
group of people really don't know how to do that. Their love
Yeah.
is very opportunistic. In my case, I'm now convinced mine did not love me. And I think that was the other level of injury for me, was to realize, like, how could I have been in a relationship for 31 years with somebody that I knew loved me but passed away?
Yeah.
Maybe it wasn't perfectly, but he did truly love me. And I even found out after he was gone, people would tell me little acts of things that he did in my service. They would come up and say, you never knew this, but he watched out for you, and this is what he did on your benefit. Whereas the ex, I continue to find out more crappy stuff he's done behind my back. I don't get the good stories. I hear all the worst stories that I was never aware of. But mine was a con. And I think, how could I have missed that? How could I have mistaken that this person loved me when they really didn't love me? It was very devastating to describe that or discover that. But here's why I think women get missed. I think, and this to me, I feel really sad about this as our society. I think that the feminine stereotype, if we could stand back and let's think of, for example, a Marilyn Monroe, or think about the women that we have idealized as a woman, is actually not very healthy. She's actually quite sick. She's she's codependent. She doesn't have a really good sense of herself. She's manipulative. She uses her sexual appeal to draw people in. And she uses a lot of passive aggression. She doesn't ask for what she really wants. She's passive aggressive about what she wants. She plays games a bit. So when we stand back and look at that, I think that we then mistaken that, unfortunately, as a woman, so that when we get into these relationships, where men get into relationship with women, and with that type of woman, they get tore apart by her, and then they step away and say, well, that's just women. No, that's a particular type of woman. It's not women. I mean, when I have these, I talk a lot to men privately on the side about the stuff, and I see this confusion. That's women. No, that's a group of women. In fact, I don't know women like that because I don't have these women in my circles. I deliberately get rid of them.
Yes.
But you keep talking about women. No, it's a certain type of woman. And I'm not in that group. So first of all, it doesn't offend me. I feel bad that happened to you. But yeah, I'm hearing you resonate with that. You're seeing the same thing.
I see similar comments that, all women do this. And I'm like, not the women that I know. That's
right. I always
not
scratch my head, like, who are you talking about? I don't know. But I don't disbelieve their stories. I know their stories are true. In fact, there's a research study that came out, I think it was early 80s or late 90s. I'm sorry, early 80s or late 70s. And I even know one of them was my professor, was the researcher on the study, Paul Warder. A fascinating study. It was among college students. They had a list of adjectives, adjectives that you would use to describe people, like courageous, brave, assertive, healthy, just words that describe people. And some of them were hard words, like victim or pitiful or weak or whatever, passive. And then they asked them, pick the words that describe a healthy man. And then they said, pick the words that describe a healthy woman. And then the last category was pick the words that describe a mental patient. And the words that describe men were what you would think, the confident, in charge, big kind of healthy person. The words that described women and mental patients hugely correlated with one another. So yeah, and that was a study on stereotypes, sexual stereotypes. And I think that unfortunately, we haven't deviated very far in the last 40 years, even though I think women in themselves have made more gains, because now we can do all these things that we used to not be able to do. We have bank accounts, we can get divorced, we now are in the workforce, we're doing all these things that we have never been able to do before. But I don't think our perspective, the sexual stereotype, has changed, has caught up or kept up. And as a result, that's why men are so shocked when they get into a toxic relationship with a woman, because they didn't realize she was toxic. They thought she was just a typical average woman.
Yeah, I so understand that. I mean, I have a brother who's been in toxic relationships with women, so absolutely know they exist. I also have to wonder if the stereotype, which comes first, the chicken or egg, if we pathologized a lot of things that women experience, especially in the early 50s. They were like, oh, she's hysterical, let's lock her up. And I'm not sure if it which came first, is
Yeah.
it the chicken or egg? Is it the women are hysterical and unhealthy, or is their reactions to disrespectful behavior and being oppressed in, a society that
Yeah.
oppresses us, pathologized?
I would say it's both and.
Yeah.
I think that, is always the simplest explanation when it comes to human nature is not the case. It's usually highly complex. Years ago, I
Mm,
read an article about why did Van Gogh cut off his ear? And I think you
mm,
could even find it. It was graduate level, but the end result of the article was, we'll never know why, because there's a myriad reasons why. There's thousands of reasons why it cut off his ears. Yes, it may have because of his father's relationship or because of spurned love or, for lots and lots of complicated reasons. And they're all accurate at the same time. That's the other part I know that we don't like as humans. We don't like the complexity of stuff, but it is really, really complex. So to sort of wrap up today, what do you think has been your biggest takeaway about covert abuse as you're moving forward as in a healing person?
My biggest takeaway is I think there needs to be more education about it. I think
Mm,
just everyone needs to learn because even in a more overtly abusive relationship starts out as covert abuse and then escalates. And I think clocking it in the beginning when someone is talking down to you and you feel small in a relationship, why? Why do you feel small? What are the language, what is the language that you're using to describe your partner in your relationship? The behaviors, how to spot manipulation. These need to be things that I feel like should be taught in school. I think we need to learn this so that we can avoid dangerous people and those wolves in sheep's clothing.
I do agree. I think, and I don't think we do enough about even teaching about what it feels like to be in a dangerous situation, what it
Hmm.
feels like. We know what it feels like around us, but we don't know what it feels like inside of us. And that's where even
Yeah.
you started today with saying we need to get better with being in tune with our bodies. And when something feels
Yes.
off, we need to say, I don't feel safe. May not know why. I may not never need to know why, but I need to get out because I don't feel safe.
That's really important.
It is. So in the podcast extra, we're going to jump over there and talk about the differences. We hinted at it today, but we didn't get into it. The differences between types of aggression. You talked about the fact that you recognize overt aggression, the big bully, but you didn't recognize covert aggression. That's what it
Hmm.
actually is called. So we're going to go over there and define what it is and then talk about how to recognize it better. So I'm so super excited about that. Thank you for joining me today. This is a really great discussion. I just loved having you on.
Thank you so much for having me, Kerry. I'm so excited to be here.
You're welcome.
Well, that's a wrap for this week's episode. Are you following me on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube? Find me at Kerry McAvoy, Ph.D. Now you don't need to wait a week to get your next podcast fix. Join Breaking Free from Narc Abuse at Substack.com to get exclusive audio content for subscribers. To sign up, click the link in the show notes. And whether you're in, consider leaving, or have left a narcissistic relationship, find community support at my Toxic Free Relationship Club. You can learn about this resource as well as others at KerryMcAvoyPhD.com. And I'll see you back here next week.